Treasurer Jim Chalmers, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks,
Thank
Carly.
you very much.
Thank you.
So, what would your view be for what can Brisbane be famous for going forward?
Well, thanks for having us, Kylie, and everyone, and great panel. I think we've got an opportunity in southeast Queensland and Greater Brisbane in particular to be the most dynamic part of the national economy. And I think that's partly about the Olympics, but it's not just about the Olympics. I think if you think about the combination of industries and opportunities here in the southeast corner of Queensland, I think that's, if we fast forward to 9 or 10 years' time down the track, I think will be a much bigger part, arguably the most dynamic, the most productive, the most innovative, the most competitive part of the national economy. And so really I think, we've become accustomed in this country to thinking about two things. First of all, that the prosperity is created in the kind of Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra triangle, and I think a much greater proportion of the prosperity is going to be created in the, let's say, Sunshine Coast, Ipswich, Gold Coast triangle, with the big population centres of Brisbane and especially Logan making a big contribution to that. And so we'll need to think differently about that. And then secondly, for my whole life, and people would be familiar with this understanding that in Queensland, most of the population lives outside Greater Brisbane. That's been the case, I think, since 1978. And my Treasury guys tell me in the population centre that around the time of the Olympics, that will cross over and we'll go back to being a state where most of the population lives in Greater Brisbane. And so that will change how we think about ourselves as well, how we think about the national economy, but also as Queenslanders, how we think about that balance between Greater Brisbane and the bush.
Excellent. So, Treasurer, I think we've all heard a lot today about the importance of bringing our regions together. This is about future Brisbane, but because we are a gateway to so many other places, aren't we?
Yeah.
Whether it's the Sunshine Coast, the Gold Coast, Logan, of course. Are you at all conflicted as a Queenslander in the sense of the government stopping a lot of this infrastructure projects that we so desperately need? And I'm talking specifically about the Sunshine Coast to Maroochydore Extended Rail, the Bruce Highway, which unfortunately is pretty much a death trap. Last year, your Federal Infrastructure Minister, Catherine King, said we really needed to get going at once, no time to waste, on Sunshine Coast to Maroochydore. What has changed?
Well, I think one of the things that's changed is we've got about $33 billion of blowouts in the pipeline. And it's not always recognised, but the announcement that Catherine made in the last week or two, there's actually more money than was originally committed for each of the states, including Queensland, billions of dollars more for Queensland. And I do understand, not just as a Queenslander, but I understand as the nation's treasurer, that every state would like more money than we were able to provide. And, I know Stephen's here and I speak with other colleagues in the state government. I respect all of the ministers who've made their views known about that. But the reality is, it's one thing to write a press release about building something. It's another thing to build it. We've got to be conscious of the cost of these things, as both levels, all three levels of government are. And there was no way to accommodate all $33 billion of those blowouts. We have provided extra money to Queensland and to the other states as well. They would like more, that's understood. But we've got to make sure that we can actually build the stuff that's been announced, and that's what we're trying to do.
So with the Sunshine Coast to Maroochydore, that's been postponed indefinitely. Would there be a scenario where you might say, well, let's just delay it and see what's happening? But there's a very pervasive sense that it's been cut altogether.
Well, what the independent review did, and then what the Cabinet considered was, a whole bunch of projects, whether they've already begun. If they've already begun, obviously they're going ahead. If we made a commitment to it in the context of the last campaign, going ahead with that. And some of the others have got different categories, whether they need rescoping, whether they need delaying, whether we can build them on a longer time frame. And no matter who's in government, at the state level or at the federal level, there's a big 10-year pipeline, in our case, a $120 billion pipeline, and we're always looking for ways to build the best and the most infrastructure that we can, consistent with the constraints we've got in our budget. And so, you would anticipate under a government of either political persuasion, there'll be new announcements made about infrastructure in the future, depending on what we can afford to build and what we have the people and the the builders to build. And so I understand why this is a contentious thing. I understand why you're asking me about it in front of all of our friends here. I get it. Our job is to manage the budget in the most responsible way, to build the best infrastructure we can as quick as we can. Part of that means being upfront with people about what's possible.
Thank you, Treasurer. Earlier today we heard from the Deputy Premier Stephen Miles, who said he would be raising this issue with you very shortly. He
already has. I walked.
Well, I'm sure he caught you as you walked in.
Ago. Yeah.
Did you trip him? Trip him over? We've also done quite a lot of reporting in the Courier-Mail this week and last week as well about Future Brisbane, and there's been this sort of standoff, if you like, between the state Labor government and your federal Labor government over the infrastructure cuts. How much of that is a genuine argy-bargy, and how much of that do you think is, could I say, a political stunt to help propel the Palaszczuk government to victory come October 2024?
Well, I think you can anticipate my answer, Kylie, which is that, I genuinely believe, and not just because Stephen's here, and I respect Stephen and Cameron and all the colleagues, Stacia, on both sides of this, there are very good people, very good ministers who are trying to do the best for the people that we represent. I don't find it, I find it neither surprising nor especially kind of controversial that this terrific state government would like more money from the feds for infrastructure and for other purposes, as the other states would. And I respect them enough to be upfront with them and say that we would like to build as much as we can, but we can't ignore, there's not $33 billion down the back of the federal couch. And so we can't just pretend that we get a blowout of that nature, which is not really anybody's fault. We can't pretend that we can fund all of that. We can give extra money to the states, which we're doing. We can work as closely as possible. I don't see it in political terms. I see it as two governments trying to do the best they can for the people they represent.
Thank you so much, Treasurer.